Good afternoon. Not too long ago, I received an invitation to participate in the Malaysia Peace Organization's effort to criminalize war and establish a tribunal to try the heads of state who violated the peace and led their countries into war and occupation. When I was in Kuala Lumpur, I had the opportunity to meet one of my heroes, Dr. Mahathir, who stood up against the very same individuals who are today wreaking havoc on the US economy in a feeding frenzy on the imperial carcass. As a result, Malaysia became an outpost of resistance in Asia. Dr. Mahathir's bold action was the first time I came to know Malaysia, and that was by way of news reports. And when I had the opportunity to travel there for the purpose of fashioning a world without war, I dubbed Kuala Lumpur the world capital of peace. Thank you, Malaysia, for showing the world, along with Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, and others, that national dignity is possible. For dignity depends on peace, and peace depends on justice, and justice depends on truth. So our charge today is to help the world attain dignity. At that 2007 Kuala Lumpur Peace Conference, I met victims of war crimes, torture, and crimes against humanity, all made possible because of US policy and US taxpayers. It was an emotional conference for me because I came face to face with the scars borne by victims of war. The next year, I spent International Human Rights Day, which was 2008, in Havana, Cuba, with family members of victims of US aggression against that fiercely independent island nation. And while I was there, over and over and over again, I heard the word dignity and how there is dignity in resistance. I can't help but remember that it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who 40 years ago said that the United States was the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet. Sadly, violence sponsored by the US directly or indirectly has only intensified. And because I stand in London right now, where tens of thousands of people are about to take to the streets in protest of war and occupation, I can't omit the roles that London and Europe have played in promoting this worldwide violence. The world is rising up against the lies that we've been told. People are reclaiming their dignity against the greed, corruption, and theft that has been committed in our name with our tax dollars. In the streets, you will hear the word dignity. That's what the US Civil Rights Movement was all about. And its spirit of resistance to injustice shaped my childhood experiences. I saw what is possible when people stand up. On the night before his murder, Dr. King said that he was proud to be alive at the end of the 20th century when people were rising up saying, "We want to be free." Today, we are rising up and saying that we want to be free from hatred and division and oppression and war. I admire those who stood up on the national stage, and I've tried to do my part too. Thus, in 1991, as a member of the Georgia legislature, when President George Herbert Walker Bush bombed Baghdad, I asked the Speaker of the House if I could speak on a point of personal privilege to explain my opposition to Operation Desert Storm. My colleagues stood up and walked out on me during my remarks. And then when I decided to run for the United States Congress, I knew that the foundation of all US policy, whether domestic or foreign, had to be respect for human rights. So when the marginalized and dispossessed of the world came to me, I did my best to help them. There was no room, in my view, for policies promoting nuclear weapons, NATO expansion, discrimination against any person, group, or country. I voted against every Pentagon budget that came before the Congress. Thank you. I introduced legislation to stop the transfer of U.S. weapons to regimes that did not respect human rights and to eliminate the use of depleted uranium munitions. I spoke out against President Clinton's sanctions against Iraq and President George W. Bush's war and occupation against Iraq. I represented the Congressional Black Caucus at the Durban World Conference Against Racism, despite intense pressure to not attend in order to avoid a discussion of Zionism. I worked with a team of internationally respected lawyers to prosecute Sharon, Barak, and Netanyahu for war crimes, as well as those responsible for incitement to genocide in Gujarat, India. I even turned down a politician's dream, fame, fortune, and endless re-election if I would just get arrested in front of the Sudan embassy and let a famous Zionist lawyer bail me out of jail. Underlying it all was my belief that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights ought to have universal application. After all, it was Dr. King who reminded us that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But when the subject was justice for Palestine, while I stood my ground, the political resolve underneath me dissolved beneath my feet. When the pro-Israel lobby targeted me for defeat, even lifelong family friends abandoned me, and those I thought stood for principle shrank in utter fear. For all the talk about justice, the principles underlying the Universal Declaration of Human Rights melted away when the topic was Palestine, or any other project of the pro-Israel lobby, like Durban, Sudan, Rwanda, Congo, or protecting their interests in blood diamonds. Unfortunately for me, all the issues I had taken on with great enthusiasm pitted me for the people, but against the interests of the all-powerful pro-Israel lobby. And then they decided in 2002 that I had to go. That came after I questioned the Bush administration's version of what happened on September 11th, 2001. The pro-Israel lobby activated its operatives inside both the Republican and Democratic parties, and I lost my campaign for re-election to Congress. Even though 2 years later, in 2004, I ran again and regained my seat, I still wore a target on my forehead. And again, pro-Israel, pro-war Democrats and Republicans joined to oust me from Congress in 2006, when I was the only Democratic member of Congress to lose re-election. The significance of the 2006 election is this. The very first bill to fund the war came up for a vote and passed with exactly the number of votes required. Had I been there to cast my no vote, the bill would have failed. It became clear to me that the war party inside the United States that consists of pro-war elements inside both the Democratic and Republican parties do a darn good job of counting their votes. And they make sure that they retain enough votes to keep our country at war. It's clear that those who favor war